Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new episode of Cargo Masterminds presented by Stat Media Group. As always, on every Monday, we are so pleased to bring a new guest to the show and talk about what is making news in the global air cargo industry. Industry organizations are so crucial for the growth and development of the industry and for the members of the organization. The International Air Cargo Association, or popularly called TIACA, is one such unique industry organization representing and uniting every stakeholder in the air cargo logistic value chain that include shippers, freight forwarders, ground handlers, airports, airlines, manufacturers, and solution providers. Officially launched in early 1990s, TIACA's beginning goes back to 1960 when a committee of the Society of Automobile Engineers in the US launched the first air cargo forum to explore the needs of the emerging air cargo industry. Decades later, and in the midst of a global pandemic, as the aviation industry, among many others, go through one of the worst ever crises in the history, TIACA is changing itself more than cosmetically. It aims to truly represent the global air cargo industry in all aspects. Foundation for change has been set, keeping in mind the current trends that we see in society, global trade, and commerce. Vision has been crystallized, and the organization has a full-time leader to make things happen for TIACA. I'm so happy to welcome my guest today, Glyn Hughes, Director General of TIACA, who begins the new job today. Glyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Reggie. I appreciate that.
Glyn, today you take up the responsibility of Director General at the International Air Cargo Association, or TIACA. New role created to establish and implement TIACA's vision and strategic objectives. What are some of your top and immediate priorities, and how do you intend to achieve them?
That's a great question, and it really gives me great pleasure and it's a privilege to talk to you, as you say, on my very first day on the job. I think as an immediate priority, I feel I have to introduce myself to all of the members of the association. Certainly, I know quite a fair number of them from previous interactions, and I know quite a lot of the board members, but I really need to understand from the board exactly what they have in terms of their expectations from the role and from the association going forward. TIACA has a very engaged board. It has a very engaged chair and vice chair and an extremely interactive association. So I'm very much looking forward to understanding the direction that the association is going, and then seeing how I can add my weight to its programs, such as the sustainability, the work it's been doing recently in conjunction with Pharma.Aero with regards to vaccine movements, and of course, digitalization and many of the other challenges that the industry is currently facing.
Glyn, what made you to choose this role?
Well, that's also a very good question. First of all, I'm going to link it with my time at IATA. I felt it was time to leave IATA after nearly 3 decades. And what I was very pleased about is when I was available, I submitted my application and was very happy to be considered by the board and the selection committee. And I think the uniqueness of TIACA in terms of bringing all of the supply chain parties together, the partners around one table, I think is very unique. I think the role that IATA plays is tremendous. The role that FIATA plays is tremendous. And TIACA has its uniqueness in the sense that in these very collaborative times, and as we've all found out from the last 12 months, the industry needs to collaborate far more. And therefore, an association that actually represents and has members from across the spectrum, all parties of the supply chain, makes it uniquely positioned. And I feel very privileged that I was appointed in this particular capacity.
With such extensive experience in the air cargo industry, and particularly in an industry organization like IATA, of course, you work with only the airline partners. So how do you intend to represent the TIACA and all of its stakeholders in the air cargo logistic value chain?
Right. Well, I'm glad you didn't mention my years in the industry because, people will look at him and think, I must have started at age 3. But, it's 37 years now in aviation, 36 of which have been in air cargo. And I think one of the uniquenesses I've just mentioned is the fact that TIACA has members from across the spectrum. But one of the challenges is that we have to recognize that each of those respective parties has different challenges. They have different business models, they have different objectives, and they have a different role to play in the supply chain. So I think one of the critical success components for me for TIACA and other, as it were, multidisciplinary associations is the ability to balance the needs of the individual specific sectors that are represented and the needs of the combined industry. And as we know, for example, the value of air cargo or various programs before, whatever you term it, but how you present the overall value that air cargo brings to people, to society, is something where you have to represent the entire supply chain. The last 12 months, we've been, as an industry, playing a tremendous role in helping keep people alive, and now with the vaccine movement, helping them stay alive, as it were. But within that, we also have to identify that and recognize that the freight forwarders, the truckers, the technology companies, the industry providers, the ground handlers, the airports, the airlines, the government officials, and the manufacturers, i.e. the shippers, everybody has a different perspective on what their particular issues are. So what we have to do, as I say, is we really have to understand the membership individually and the membership collectively. And I'm really looking forward to that in particular.
Glyn, I just want to go back to what you said. I know that you spent about 37 years in the air cargo industry, and a lot of us and a lot of the people who would eventually, who are listening to this this interview or seeing this interview wouldn't know at what age you actually started your career in the air cargo industry. And if you could give that anecdotal what is called information, it would be really nice.
Well, I mean, I was born in Crawley, which is right at the end, basically, of Gatwick Airport, edge of Gatwick Airport. 99% of people that live in Crawley work at the airport. I left school very young. I was 17, and then really just had my first job at an airline and just loved it. My very first job in the air cargo industry was working for British Caledonian, basically opening envelopes and looking at the airway bills. And it doesn't take long before the air cargo bug, bit. And as I say, the rest is history.
Okay, let me bring you back to 21st century. And as we see, global trade today increasingly happens on complex, sophisticated, but sometimes very easy to use digital platforms. And as someone who played an advocacy role in the industry organization for a large part of your career at IATA, and someone who actually championed and advocated rapid digitalization of the air cargo process, how would you, in your current role, amplify that message and get TIACA members to rapidly adopt digital innovations?
Again, a very good question, very pertinent, particularly as we're conducting this interview digitally using one of the new tools that we've all become very used to over the last 12 months. And I think the pace of digitalization and the pace of embracing technology is accelerated during these 12 months because people haven't had a choice. As we've not been able to go to events, we've been able to connect and virtually pick up the information from listening to speakers, etc. So I think that has really helped the industry avoid that question that really slowed us down for years. What's in it for me? Why should I? I'm quite happy with the way things are. Well, when you no longer have the way things are, you have to find something new. And I think this is one of the, as it were, the feelings and the momentum trends that have happened over the last 12 months that we need to continue with as we move forward. But again, coming back to your specific question about the TIACA members, I think one of the lessons that we've also learned is this industry doesn't do things because it's told to do things. It's a big boy industry. It's filled with innovators. It's filled with very dedicated professionals, and they will make a business decision to do things. So I think what we have to do, and this is true of all associations, is we really have to put the information out there which helps educate and helps bring people to that conclusion by providing them the information that they need. How will my industry become more efficient, or how will my business become more efficient if I use this tool? It's evident when it comes to things like you can't go and meet a business client anymore. So you use Zoom or you use Skype. Or you use Teams, and now you're at least doing a face-to-face interaction. So people could see the benefit. So what we need to do is then translate all these various technological new innovations that are coming through, and again, try and perhaps play some form of showcase or some form of innovative connecting point where the TIACA members can identify their own needs, and then perhaps through the association can maybe have those connections to those people, can provide the solutions for them, or at least bring that information to a broader discussion point. And obviously we'll use the various events when they resume, and we hope that one will resume later this year, when those events and we start getting back in person, and we can start doing various sessions to bring that information, to a point where people can touch it as well.
Glyn, we have been at different events, and we have been discussing on the pace of digitalization, or the concept of innovation in the air cargo industry, and we always felt ourselves ashamed as to when we look at our peer industries, they are much ahead. Even when we look at the sea freight or the ocean freight, we see them, they are far ahead in terms of innovation, in terms of digitalization. But are you of the opinion that the pandemic has actually accelerated the digitalization process, and for the air cargo industry stakeholders, they realize that it is now or never?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just challenge one of the things on your question, because we often say that the industry is the slowest industry and others are further advanced. And then you talk to those industries and they say, we're so jealous of the air cargo industry. You guys have got your act together and you're so far advanced of us. So I would say collectively, the logistics industry, we're all at that same point. We all have embraced, we're all moving forward, but we're not a fully digitalized industry. And the interoperability of the cargo, the multimodal aspects of this industry means that air, ocean, road, and rail all need to move forward, because the shippers and the freight forwarders, they're dealing with all modes. So it's very inefficient for them if one particular mode is super digitalized and another particular mode isn't. So there's a lot of cross-industry collaboration going on as well here. But I think that coming back to the pace, I'm certainly of the view that the pace of digitalization, the momentum that we saw last year will absolutely continue going forward. And again, I mentioned this event, which we're going to be holding in conjunction with Messi München in September in San Francisco. And we're actually going to do something quite unique there, which is we're going to put together, as it were, an innovation stream where we will try and take the audience through and meet some of the key innovators in Silicon Valley, for example, because we can also learn a lot from other industries about how they go from problem identification to very innovative technological-based solution.
Let me get into some of the specific questions on the TIACA. In the recent past and for quite some time, there has been a perception problem on what TIACA stands for, and to some extent, allegations of mismanagement house. And we have seen the reason why there is a revitalization or setting new vision for TIACA is all part of changing that perception. Now that you come into a new role, which has been created by TIACA as Director General, how do you look at some of these perception problems and get your stakeholders on board to change the perception that people have about TIACA, and how do you really make this as a premier air cargo industry association?
Well, I mean, the first thing I have to say is I never held those perceptions. I've always been an admirer of TIACA. It was one of the first industry events that I attended when I was sort of mature enough to be let out of the office, as it were. And I think, and I've always been an admirer of the fact that the association was able to bring together all of those disparate groups within the supply chain and get them around the table and talk about common issues. So from that particular perspective, I was always a fan, and therefore, I was always very keen to actually join the association at some point in my career. But it has to be said, over the last 12 to 18 months, under Stephen Pullmans and Sanjeev Gadia, and as I say, a very highly engaged board, a very interactive membership that has provided a lot of feedback, and a great small team, but a great team that's in Miami in Kenneth and Rachel. And they brought in some outside help and Change Horizon with Celine. Collectively they worked, and the board put together a vision of how they saw the future of the association. And I think they did a absolutely tremendous job. If you look at the vision that they've established, if you look at the programs that they want the association to focus on, they want to engage the entire membership. They really want to become focused as a member-based organization, highly in touch with its members, highly communicative and collaborative across the industry. So working with other associations, as it's already done successfully with Pharma.aero, as we mentioned before. So I have to be honest, I never listened to anything about the past. My view is always, it's tomorrow. Today and tomorrow is the most important. Next week, next month, next year, next decade. We need to be inspired by history and learn from our lessons from history, but we need to be eyes wide open looking forward. And as I say, I'm very pleased to be joining the organization, which is absolutely looking forward.
Okay, another important and critical to TIACA or any other industry organization, how do you make it financially healthy? And one of it is the membership fees and your premier industry events like TIACA, ACF, and the executive summit. And now that you have something new, probably that could be the first air cargo industry event that would take place in the world in California, sometime Silicon Valley in September. How would you look at revenue generation, making TIACA really financially healthy in your current role?
Well, I mean, again, and this is one of the expectations and one of the objectives that the board have set, is that any organization needs to be financially sound, with a solid financial base. We learned from the last 12 months that the airlines that were, as it were, uni-focused on their particular revenue sources struggled. Airports that were uni-focused struggled. And one key word that came out of most industries, which is revenue diversification. And I think this is one of the key aspects going forward, is that TIACA has one of the world's leading events, which is Air Cargo Forum. Now it's got a permanent home in Miami, and we're looking forward to the first edition being held in 2022. It also has its Cargo Executive Summit, which it will hold in the alternate year as well, which, as you know, as I've just said, will be held in San Francisco in September 21-24. We apologies for the plug there, but we hope, as you say, Reggie, it's the first opportunity for the industry to reconnect. We're doing that in partnership with Messi München. So events will be one aspect, but the association is so much more. It has a training partnership, for example, with SASI. And we have a course that's been co-developed with ICAO, SASI, and TIACA, which is about the safe supply chain. Very relevant right now, and particularly with regards to vaccine movement. But safety is one of the critical aspects that this industry has to always tackle. So I think you'll find that we will look at various other programs. There are strategic partnership programs, for example, that TIACA has that we need to look at developing. Of course, membership growth is always a good measure, not just from a revenue perspective, but it's actually an indication, one of the strongest measures about how the association is performing. If the association is performing as the board and as the chair and vice chair would, and as we as the secretariat would like, then people will be compelled and motivated to join, as it were, an organization that's again moving forward and looking ahead. So I think going forward, we will look at how we can actually diversify. TIACA also has a tremendous alumni. It's also looking at cargo service quality, for example. It's looked at potentially using some of the alumni for consultancy aspects. So this is one of the areas where I hope over perhaps my first 100 days, to use a President Biden reference here, is to actually look at and how we can actually position the association going forward. I think there's a lot of very exciting things that are happening. The sustainability is another great area. It's really playing a leading role there. And again, thanks to a great partnership with Champ Cargo Systems and others, it's really putting it's continued to put its stamp in that very important area of the industry.
An important question on the topic of TIACA: how would you like to spend your time between Geneva and Miami?
Well, I can tell you, the last week we've had here in Geneva, we've had about 3 or 4 inches of rain, which washed away the 6 or 7 or 8 inches of snow to have slush. We have strong winds. We have freezing sleet that comes down, and then the next day sunshine. Thankfully, it's sunshine now, but this morning it was, wet and windy. And then you look at the Miami weather and think, yeah, January, February wouldn't be a bad time to perhaps visit the team there. Again, through technology, we will connect very regularly through the technology platforms. One of the advantages, and again, we've said this is a membership-based organization, with me continuing to remain here in Europe, it means that I can actually connect with our members a little bit more easily, as it were, to the east of me, so that we can actually overlap with the Miami team and me here in Geneva, for example, so we can make sure that we are always accessible to the membership. And I think that's something that we will leverage tremendously. And I hope to be able to every couple of months maybe go and spend a few days with the team so we can, work and develop on some new initiatives, etc.
On to the job that you left over the weekend after as the global head of cargo at IATA, a role that you picked up in 2014. How do you look back or look at your career in IATA, and particularly as the global head of cargo?
Well, I mean, it was a very sad day, to have that last call with the team last week was quite tough. And it's actually even tough talking about it now. They're just such a fantastic team. And, my nearly 30 years with IATA, it's just been, an absolute privilege. I spent that time split over 3 offices. There was 6 years in the UK, 6 years in Montreal, and then the last, whatever it was, I get my numbers wrong, but 17, 18 years, whatever, here in Geneva. The last 6 have just been an absolute joy. The experts that remained at IATA were just leading world class in terms of the standards, the work programs. The way they responded to the pandemic last year was exceptional in terms of helping with new guidance, bringing people together, working with international associations, working with government agencies, using their standard setting and their networks to actually really address the issues of passenger aircraft being used for cargo-only operations, border blockages, new standards. I mean, they are really a tremendous team. So it's been a privilege for me to actually support them over these last few years. And in the same way, I'm looking forward to supporting the great TIACA team now. A little bit smaller, but equally professional and equally of high quality. And I've had the pleasure of knowing them for a number of years as well.
Okay, I must ask you again one more question on IATA, and how do you respond to people, which that people include also me, that IATA let you go at a time that the air cargo industry needed you most, right in the midst of a global pandemic, when air cargo literally was the backbone for the global supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have to be honest. When I read that, I feel that it's a little bit unkind to the IATA experts, the true experts. They're the ones that made my job extremely easy. With that level of expertise that were really performing the job on a day-to-day basis. It was just me, as long as I could listen to them and articulate what they were actually educating me on, I was able to, as it were, be the spokesperson, and it was an honor to be the spokesperson. But in terms of value creation, that's really with the experts that are there. So I don't think there was any issue of IATA, being foolish to let me go. I volunteered. This was a voluntary redundancy package or program that was entered into, and I put my hand up. I felt after 30 years, I looked at the cargo team. They are all world-class experts in IATA, and they will flourish to even greater heights. I have no question. And whoever succeeds me and comes in as the next global head of cargo, they inherit a fantastic group of people in a wonderful organization. I really enjoyed my time there, and I leave with some sadness internally because it's all about the relationships that are established. But I'm very much looking forward to the next challenge.
Glyn, have you left any recommendation for the next person to head or fill your role at IATA?
Actually, it would have been inappropriate for me to leave any recommendations because, the only thing I would have probably said is please, please, please don't let them be funny. Because if they get, a really, really funny person, people will then say, we've had to listen to all those terrible jokes of Glyn's for so many years, etc. But I think the key recommendation I would say to whoever it is don't look at how the job was done before, make it their own. And and I think that's the key, is that these are different times. I was very, very fortunate to follow Des. Des led the organization. He evolved it into being a listening-based organization. I had the privilege of kind of taking that baton next, and whoever then takes it on needs to create their own mark with the team there.
Glyn, I must say that we will certainly miss those one-liners at World Cargo Symposium for sure. On to my last question, Glyn, how do you look at the air cargo sector, which did and continue to do a phenomenal job in the pandemic, as the pandemic is still not come to an end? Do you think that it has got its due credit and position in the overall aviation business? Not that a lot of the air cargo industry stakeholders are actually looking for that credit and the position, but has there been a change in the last 8 months, particularly from the top leadership of the airlines and top leadership of the aviation sector, to the way that they look at the cargo as a division?
I mean, a very good question. And I think, part of the answer is I'm going to repeat what you just said in the question. The wonderful thing about this industry is it never looked for credit. It actually, from a man to a woman, from boy to girl, from top to bottom, this entire industry was about, let's get the job done, whether or not it's in times of a pandemic or in times of crisis, whether or not it's humanitarian, civil unrest, economic struggles, or economic growth. The industry just said, if there's a job to do, let's get it done. So it never looked for that credit. And I think it's very humble as an industry and very, as it were, altruistic in the fact that it just really collectively tackled what needed to be done. But you are quite right. In the last 12 months, the broader globe, whether or not that's airline CEOs who saw passenger revenues dry up, news media, who saw, you couldn't turn on CNN or BBC or read the Wall Street Journal without reading something about the air cargo industry bringing in millions of tons of PPE and then pharmaceuticals and now vaccines, etc., and e-commerce and foodstuffs with countries on lockdown. So it was really about saving the planet and supporting the planet through the most troubling times that we've faced in the last 70 years. So I think that, yes, that spirit is going to be there. From an industry revenue perspective, air cargo probably would generate about 30% or 35% of industry revenues for 2020, which is almost 3 times as much as in a normal year. I mean, it's a tremendous aspect and help the industry get through the very difficult time. But let's not underestimate the fact that air cargo needs a very solid passenger network to be resumed. It's critical for the 50% of cargo that moves in the bellies to have that connectivity. It's important for national economies for the passenger network to serve as many stations as they do to help cargo flow across the globe, not just rely on where there is sufficient volumes to justify a freighter service. So I think air cargo has done tremendously well. It will continue to do the job this year with vaccines and help the economies restart. And it will be ever more prepared for the next crisis that will happen. And we know that the next crisis will happen sooner or later, but the air cargo industry and the great men and women and all the people that are in this, including the media who've done a tremendous job as well, they'll be ready to serve and do what needs to get done.
Thanks, Glyn. It was a fabulous and fascinating conversation, and it was really nice talking to you. And we like to wish you the very best as you begin your new journey at TIACA. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Reggie. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
So that was Glyn Hughes, Director General, the International Air Cargo Association, or TIACA. Join us next Monday as we bring a new episode of Cargo Masterminds with a new guest. Thank you.